Most people never realize what is actually happening to them, not because they lack intelligence, not because the truth is hidden, but because they never stop long enough to observe. Life moves quickly, and in that speed, awareness disappears. Days become routines, routines become years, and years pass without ever being questioned. Everything feels normal, and that is exactly why nothing changes. There is something shaping your entire life right now. Something silent, something constant, something so close that it becomes invisible. It is not your job, not your past, not even your circumstances. It is the way you interpret everything. Two people can live the same moment and walk away with completely different lives. One becomes stronger, the other becomes trapped. One sees an obstacle, the other sees an ending. The event is the same, but the meaning is not. Most people never see this. They believe life happens to them. They believe emotions are automatic, that reactions are unavoidable, that their inner state depends on the outside world. So they spend their lives trying to fix everything around them, trying to control outcomes, trying to control people, trying to control what was never theirs to control. And in that process, they lose the only control that ever mattered. Look closely. How much of your energy is spent on things that are not in your hands? Other people's opinions, future outcomes, past mistakes, things you revisit again and again, as if thinking more about them will change something, but it never does. This creates a silent tension, a constant pressure inside the mind, because you are trying to manage a reality that does not respond to you. And the more you try, the more exhausted you become. But there is a different way to exist, one that most people never discover. Not because it is complex, but because it requires something rare. Awareness. Awareness of what is happening inside you, not outside, because everything begins there. Every reaction, every emotion, every decision, and yet, that is the place most people ignore. They observe the world, but never observe themselves. They notice what others do, what others say, what others think, but rarely notice what is happening inside their own mind. And that is where everything starts to go unnoticed. Your mind is constantly speaking, constantly interpreting, constantly assigning meaning. And if you are not aware of it, you begin to believe everything it says. A thought appears, this will go wrong, and you feel anxiety. Another thought appears, they are judging me, and you feel tension. Another thought appears, I'm not enough, and you hold yourself back. None of these thoughts were proven. None of them were certain, but they shaped your reality anyway. This is how most lives are lived, not through conscious decisions, but through unconscious reactions. And when reactions become patterns, patterns become identity. You don't notice it happening because it feels natural. But what feels natural is often just familiar. Familiar fear, familiar doubt, familiar hesitation. And over time, that familiarity becomes a limitation. This is why most people stay in the same place, not because they can't move forward, but because they never question what is holding them still. They assume their limits are real, when in fact, most of them are interpretations. This is the part almost no one sees. Your life is not controlled by what happens. It is controlled by what you believe about what happens. And beliefs can exist without ever being questioned. Think about how many things you accept as truth without ever stopping to ask, is this actually real, or just something I've repeated long enough to believe? This question alone can begin to change everything, because the moment you question a thought, you create distance from it, and in that distance, something new appears. Choice. Most people think they have no choice in how they feel, but that is only because they never pause between thought and reaction. Everything happens too fast. Thought, reaction, emotion, automatic. But when you slow it down, even slightly, you begin to see something different. There is a space, a small one, but powerful, between what happens and how you respond. And in that space, your entire life is being decided. Most people never access it because they are always reacting, always moving, always distracted. But the moment you become aware of that space, You are no longer completely controlled by your patterns. You begin to see them. And once you see something clearly, it loses part of its power over you. This is where change actually begins. Not outside, but inside awareness. Not by forcing different results, but by seeing differently. And yet, almost no one is trained to do this. You are trained to focus outward, to achieve, to compare, to react, but not to observe. And without observation, there is no clarity. Without clarity, there is no real control. Only repetition, the same reactions, the same thoughts, the same outcomes, again and again, until life starts to feel predictable. Not because it has to be, but because nothing inside you has changed. This is what keeps people stuck. Not their situation, but their lack of awareness of how they respond to it. And the most dangerous part is that it feels normal, so it is never questioned. But once you begin to notice, even slightly, everything starts to shift. Not dramatically, not instantly, but quietly. You pause a little more. You react a little less. You observe what you are thinking, instead of immediately believing it. And in those small moments, you begin to take something back. Control, not over the world, but over yourself. And that is where real power begins. But control, in the way most people understand it, is an illusion. You cannot control what others think. You cannot control how life unfolds. You cannot control every outcome. And yet, that is exactly where most of your energy goes, trying to manage what was never yours. This creates a constant inner conflict, because reality keeps moving, and your mind keeps resisting. You want things to go a certain way. You expect people to act a certain way. You imagine outcomes before they happen. And when reality doesn't match those expectations, you feel frustrated, disappointed, sometimes even lost. Not because something terrible happened, but because something didn't go the way your mind planned. This is where suffering quietly begins. Not in the event itself, but in the resistance to it. Most people never notice this. They think the problem is external, the situation, the person, the timing. But if you observe carefully, you will see something different. The same situation can be experienced in completely different ways. One person resists it, another adapts. One sees injustice, another sees reality, and the outcome of their inner state shapes everything that follows. This is why awareness is not just useful, it is essential, because without it, you are constantly reacting to interpretations, not to reality. And interpretations can be wrong, distorted, exaggerated, influenced by fear. But if you never question them, they become your truth. This is how people create invisible limitations. They don't come from the world. They come from unexamined thinking. A belief forms quietly. I'm not capable. I always fail. People won't understand me. And once that belief settles, it begins to filter everything. You notice only what confirms it. You ignore what contradicts it. You act in ways that reinforce it. Until one day, it feels like reality. But it never was. It was just a thought, repeated enough times to feel real. This is one of the most dangerous patterns, because it hides in plain sight. You don't see it as a limitation. You see it as truth. And as long as that happens, nothing changes. But the moment you question it, something shifts. You don't need to fight the thought. You don't need to replace it immediately. You only need to see it clearly, because clarity weakens illusion. And once an illusion loses strength, it can no longer control you in the same way. This is how internal freedom begins. Not by changing everything at once, but by seeing what was previously invisible. And there is something else most people never notice. Where your attention goes, your life follows. Attention is not neutral, it is directional. If your attention is constantly on problems, your life feels like a problem. If your attention is on comparison, your life feels insufficient. If your attention is on fear, your life feels restricted. Nothing external changed, only your focus did. And yet, your entire experience shifted. This is why attention is one of the most valuable things you have. But most people give it away freely. To distractions, to meaningless content, to endless noise, without ever asking, is this worth my life? Because that is what attention really is. Time, directed, and once time is gone, it does not return. This is another truth most people avoid, not consciously, but through distraction. It is easier to scroll, easier to react, easier to stay occupied, than to sit in silence and observe your own life. But silence reveals things. It shows you where your time is going. It shows you what you are avoiding. It shows you patterns you would rather ignore. And that is why many people never stay there long, because awareness comes with responsibility. Once you see clearly, you can no longer pretend you didn't. And that creates a choice. Continue the same patterns or change them. Most people delay that choice. They tell themselves, later, when things calm down, when I feel ready. But later is where most intentions disappear. Because life doesn't pause. It keeps moving. Quietly, consistently. Days pass, whether you are aware or not. And if nothing changes inside you, those days start to look the same. Not identical, but similar enough. That time begins to blur. Weeks feel like days. Months feel like weeks. Years feel like something that passed too quickly. And when people finally stop to reflect, they often ask the same question. Where did the time go? But the real question is different. Where was my attention? Because that is where your life was. Not in the plans you made. Not in the things you postponed. But in what you paid attention to every single day. This is why small moments matter more than big intentions. A single reaction, a single decision, a single shift in awareness, repeated enough times, becomes a different life. Not instantly, but inevitably. And yet, most people are waiting for something bigger, a major change, a perfect moment, a sudden transformation. But life rarely works that way. It changes quietly, through repetition, through small, almost invisible shifts. This is why awareness must also be consistent, not intense for a moment and forgotten the next day, but present, again and again. In simple moments, when you feel irritation rising, and pause, when a negative thought appears and you question it, when you are about to react and choose not to. These moments seem small, but they are not. They are where your patterns begin to break. And once a pattern breaks, something new becomes possible. This is how real change happens. Not by forcing yourself into a new life, but by no longer unconsciously repeating the old one. And over time, this creates something rare. Stability, not because life becomes stable, but because you do. Situations still change. People still act unpredictably. Outcomes still vary. But your inner state is no longer entirely dependent on them. And that creates a quiet form of freedom. One that most people spend their entire lives searching for. In the wrong places. They search for it in success, in approval, in control. But it was never there. It was always in how you relate to what happens. And this is what 99% of people never truly see. There is something else quietly shaping your life. Something most people never question. The need to be seen in a certain way. Not just accepted, but approved, respected, admired, validated. This need rarely appears clearly. It doesn't say, I need approval. Instead, it hides in small decisions. What you say, what you don't say, what you try, what you avoid. All influenced by a silent question. What will they think? And without realizing it, this question begins to control your life. You hesitate to act, not because you are incapable, but because you are being observed, or at least, you believe you are. You adjust your behavior. You filter your words. You reshape your identity to fit expectations that may not even be real. And slowly, you move further away from who you actually are. This is one of the most subtle forms of control, because it doesn't feel like control. It feels like caution. It feels like being careful, like being socially aware, like being responsible. But underneath, there is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. And fear, when left unobserved, becomes a silent guide. It starts making decisions for you. You don't try certain things. You don't express certain thoughts. You don't follow certain paths, not because you chose not to, but because fear chose for you. And the most dangerous part is that it feels like your decision, but it isn't. It is a reaction to imagined judgment, because most of the time, people are not thinking about you as much as you think. They are thinking about themselves, their own concerns, their own insecurities, their own lives, and yet, you shape your life around their imagined opinions. This is how freedom is lost, not through force, but through internal pressure. The pressure to fit, to be accepted, to avoid standing out. But there is a cost. Every time you choose approval over truth, you lose a part of your clarity. Every time you stay silent when you should speak, you reinforce hesitation. Every time you avoid action out of fear, you strengthen the pattern that keeps you still. And over time, this creates a life that feels restricted. Not because you lacked opportunity, but because you never allowed yourself to fully move. This is why so many people feel stuck, even when nothing is physically stopping them. The limitation is internal and invisible. But once you begin to see it, it becomes impossible to ignore. You start noticing hesitation. You start noticing when you are holding back. You start noticing when fear is guiding your actions. And in that awareness, something changes. You begin to separate yourself from it. You realize this is fear, not truth. And that realization creates space. The same space where all change begins. Now there is a choice. Follow the pattern or step outside of it. Most people never reach this point because they never see the pattern. But once you do, you cannot go back to being completely controlled by it. Even if you still feel fear, it no longer defines every decision. And slowly, you begin to act differently, not dramatically, but intentionally. And that changes the direction of your life. There is another layer most people avoid: the illusion of control over the future. The mind constantly tries to predict what will happen, to prepare, to avoid pain, to guarantee outcome. It creates scenarios, possibilities, worst-case situations, and then reacts to them as if they were real. This creates anxiety, not because something is happening, but because something might happen. The mind tries to solve problems that don't exist yet, and in doing so, it creates real stress from imaginary situations. This is how people suffer twice, once in imagination and once in reality, if it even happens. But most imagined problems never become real. They exist only in the mind, and yet they consume real energy, real time. This is why so many people feel mentally exhausted, not from what they experience, but from what they anticipate. The constant projection into the future pulls them away from the only place where life exists, the present moment. Right now, most of what you fear is not happening. Right now, most of your concerns are not real. They are possibilities, and possibilities do not require suffering. They require awareness. The ability to recognize this is a thought about the future, not reality. This distinction is simple, but powerful. Because once you see it clearly, you stop feeding unnecessary stress. You stop reacting to things that don't exist, and your mind begins to settle. Not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer creating additional weight. This is where a different kind of strength appears. Not force, not control. Clarity. The ability to see things as they are, without distortion. And clarity changes everything. Because when you see clearly, you act differently. You waste less energy. You react less impulsively. You choose more carefully. And over time, that creates a completely different experience of life. But there is one more thing. Something even deeper. Something most people avoid thinking about completely. Not because it is complicated, but because it is uncomfortable. Your time is limited. Not in theory. In reality, there will be a last day, a last conversation, a last opportunity, but you will not know when. And because of that, It is easy to behave as if there is always more time to change, more time to start, more time to become who you want to be. So things are postponed. Important decisions, meaningful actions, necessary changes, all pushed into the future. But the future is not guaranteed. And while you delay, life continues, quietly. Days pass without announcement, and if you are not paying attention, they disappear without meaning. This is not meant to create fear. It is meant to create clarity. Because when you truly understand that time is limited, your perspective changes. You stop overvaluing small things. You stop holding on to unnecessary conflicts. You stop wasting energy on what does not matter. And you begin to ask a different question. Not, what do I feel like doing, but what actually matters? This question simplifies everything. It cuts through distraction, through noise, through hesitation, and brings your attention back to what is real. Because in the end, your life is not measured by what you intended to do, but by what you actually did. And that is decided in small moments, every day. There is one last thing most people never truly see: the difference between existing and actually living. On the surface, they look the same. You wake up, you move through the day, you complete tasks, you go to sleep, and then repeat. From the outside, it looks like life. But inside, something is missing. Awareness. Most people are not living consciously. They are repeating thoughts, repeating reactions, repeating patterns, day after day. Not because they choose to, but because they never stopped to question them. Life becomes automatic. Wake up, check something, react, distract, continue. There is no pause, no reflection, no real presence. And because of that, life begins to pass unnoticed, not in dramatic ways, but quietly. Days blend into each other. Weeks disappear. Months collapse into memory. And one day, there is a realization. Time passed, not slowly, not loudly, but silently. This is how most people lose their lives. Not through failure, not through tragedy, but through unconscious repetition. And the most dangerous part is that it feels normal, so it is never questioned. But if you look closely, you may begin to notice something. Moments where you are not fully present, moments where your mind is elsewhere, moments where you are reacting without choosing. These moments seem small, but they are not, because your life is made of them. Not the big events, not the rare milestones, but the quiet, ordinary moments that happen every single day. And if those moments are lived unconsciously, your entire life becomes unconscious. This is what 99% of people never realize. They are waiting for something bigger to change their life. A new opportunity, a new phase, a new version of themselves. But life is not waiting. It is happening. Now, in this moment. And this moment is always where everything begins. Not tomorrow, not later. Now, the way you think right now. The way you respond right now. The way you direct your attention right now. That is your life. Not the plans, not the intentions, not the ideas, but what you are actually doing in real time. This is where most people disconnect. They believe thinking about change is the same as changing, but it isn't. Understanding something does not mean you are living it. And this is where many remain stuck. They know what to do. They have heard the ideas. They understand the principles, but nothing changes. Because understanding without action is still inaction. Real change is quieter. It happens when you act differently in small moments. When you choose awareness instead of reaction. When you choose clarity instead of assumption. When you choose presence instead of distraction. These choices are subtle, almost invisible. But over time, they create a different direction. And direction is what shapes a life. Not intensity, not sudden transformation, but consistent, conscious direction. This is where your control exists. Not over everything, but over this moment and how you meet it. Most people will ignore this. They will continue reacting, continue distracting themselves, continue postponing, because it is easier. Easier than observing. Easier than changing. Easier than taking responsibility. But easy has a cost. It costs awareness. It costs time. It costs the possibility of a different life. And that cost is paid slowly until one day there is nothing left to change, but you are here. And that matters because even a brief moment of awareness is enough to begin. Not to transform everything instantly, but to see differently. And once you see differently, you cannot fully return to unconscious patterns. You begin to notice. You notice your thoughts, your reactions, your habits. You notice where your time goes. You notice what is real and what is created by your mind. And in that noticing, there is power. Quiet power. Not loud, not visible, but real. The power to pause. The power to choose. The power to choose. The power to not follow every impulse. And over time, that power grows. Not because you force it, but because you stop ignoring it. This is the shift. Not becoming someone else, but becoming aware of who you already are and how you are living. Most people never reach this point. Not because they can't, but because they never look. They stay on the surface, distracted, reactive, unaware, and life passes quietly. But you don't have to follow that path. You don't have to live unconsciously. You don't have to repeat the same patterns indefinitely. Because the moment you become aware, even slightly, something changes. You are no longer just reacting. You are choosing, and that is where life truly begins. If this made you pause, even for a moment, then you've already seen what most people never do. Stay aware.